Sorry, I didn't do recording during that time in between. I was like, oh, we'll do breakouts. And then should have kept it recording the whole time. What I'd love to speak to for a minute or two is um, how we are learning from a specific community development model, which is based in community philanthropy. And it's basically how do we mobilize resources that already exist in the community. So in Barichara, we are creating a territorial foundation. And a territorial foundation is easiest to understand if you contrast it with other kinds of foundations. So the original foundations were private family foundations. You know, people become rich, they decide to hide their money from taxes and create foundations, and then they use that money to do philanthropic work of various kinds. And in the 1920s, a different model of foundation was invented in Ohio, which was the community foundation. And this is a foundation where members of the community pool their money together and then direct it toward the needs of the community. So this model has been around for about 100 years, and it's not based in private family wealth. It's based in community assets and community wealth. And then there was a group in the late 1980s in Monterrey, Mexico, that took this idea of community foundations and decided to apply it to their territory. And so they created the first territorial foundation, which by the same way of thinking is to mobilize the resources of the territory to address the needs of the territory using a foundation. And what's powerful about this model of foundation is that it's multi-purpose. So it's not just that it's like a foundation that focuses on violence against women, or a foundation that focuses on the elderly, or a foundation that works on education for small children. You know, many foundations are thematic, but a territorial foundation is multi-purpose. It's whatever the themes are for the whole territory. So they could focus on water, they could focus on soil, they could focus on domestic violence, they could focus on education for kids, because all of these are things that their territory needs. And then another thing about a territorial foundation is that it's multi-actor, meaning that it doesn't work with just one group of people, but it actually convenes and forms alliances of diverse groups of people. So the territorial foundation might create a focus on water and then mobilize all of the community groups that work on water and then help them mobilize resources collaboratively. And so this means that the territorial foundation implements almost nothing. It does very little implementation because most of the implementation is done by the actors of the territory. It occasionally will implement something like a leadership training program, a service leadership program, something that might generally be beneficial to lots of other groups if there is not already a group that focuses on that, whatever that capacity is. So occasionally a territorial foundation will implement, but almost never. What it tends to do instead is to convene, to map, to support, to build structure that the organizations can't build themselves, and then to liberate autonomy back to the community. And one way that this is done is to create community funds. So there might be a community fund for education and a different community fund for reproductive health of women and a different community fund for water. But what I find powerful is that the community fund is not a fund. So I think it's misnamed, even though that's the standard terminology. A community fund is actually an alliance of people. It's a web of relationships between people who care about the same theme. So the territorial foundation might go out into the community and find all of the people working on regenerative education and then convene them and then help them mobilize resources together, which creates a fund for regenerative education. But it's actually the relational space that does it. And I wanted to tell this to you because you may not decide to create a territorial foundation. You may not decide to use this specific model, It's the model we're using in Barichara. So I know a lot about it, but it's more that I want you to see that there are models like this. And that this problem of how to govern the existing actors of the space who might easily come into conflict and competition is to have a neutral actor or a neutral space whose job is to serve all of the actors, whose job is to help all of them do their job better. And this separation and this neutrality is what enables a territorial foundation to work. And so in your areas, both in Paonia and those of you who are on the call from Carbondale, you're filled with actors. Your biggest problem is you have too many. Like, what do we do with all these nonprofits and all these programs and all these funds and all these things? And the solution is to go back to the larger level of the entire territory and have someone hold the neutrality and the holism of that place. And then the other thing is to let the land guide you. I think it was Len who said it, that they went back to looking at the maps of the different watersheds and what do the watersheds need, and then how would the humans organize for the watershed? That was a really good example of what we're talking about. Is we naturally know how to collaborate for what the land needs. But if we talk about what the human groups need, we may never anchor ourselves to reality. We may get lost in the smoke and mirrors of egos and insecurities between the people. And so letting the land organize us is a big deal. It's really, really powerful to say, well, this watershed has these actors that are already working in it, but this other watershed in our same territory has different actors, but they could collaborate because the land needs them. There might be a place that's focused on watershed restoration, but they don't have anyone who specializes in fish. But there's someone in another part of the territory who really knows fish. And they can start to collaborate because their watershed needs to heal the population of fish. And so this way of thinking that the land tells you how to organize, and then having some neutral space that is focused on the holistic health of the entire territory is what's really essential. And so that's the thing that I wanted to name, that the Territorial Foundation model is designed to address, but there may be other models as well. I just wanted you to have the concreteness of that model to be able to think with. So I hope that that's helpful before we go to a break.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so I realized earlier I didn't give a great explanation of what's going to happen over the break because I was so frazzled with my tech anxiety. But I'm really excited about it. We're like a watershed seeing itself is kind of the focus for the second half of this session. We're going to start with Joe's going to share the map of Barichara and their projects to give us a sense of that mapping work and what that could look like here. If we have time, Joe, I was thinking it would also be great to share some of that like continental scale perspective that you were sharing and kind of the parallels between our work here and what's happening in Canada. We're also going to get a taste of our role as kind of a leverage point here within the greater Colorado River watershed, because I'm inviting Dev Carey to share a bit about his work traveling down the river with his students and observing how the dynamics of the Colorado River affect the people, the plants, and the animals, the ecology along the way. We're going to also talk about like our work at in the headwaters. Jake from Western Slopes Conservation Center is going to give a presentation about right here about some of the work on the Smith Fork with reintroducing beavers, or rather creating beaver habitat. That's a better way to say it. Yeah. And then I'd like to kind of form a circle and invite folks to share what your perspective is on the watershed, what your niche is within the watershed, kind of what is your work and how does it relate to this bigger picture of the watershed. If you don't have a project, that's great, that's fine. Just like kind of what's your relationship to the watershed briefly, and also create some space for any like needs and offers that want to be shared just to continue the organizing and weaving work and like make space for something tangible to come out of today's session. So we're going to try to squeeze all that into about an hour and 10 minutes. So with that, like now's the time for a 10-minute break. I wanted to make it a little longer so folks could run downtown